Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Bright. Word's out that this movie's really bad. And when anyone's making a movie, they don't set out to make a bad one. Or most of the time, really. They try to make the best movie they couldn't possibly make. And I don't think that's true with this movie at all. They tried to make something very high concept, something that would work within the wheelhouse of this director who made End of Watch, who fetishizes the LAPD, who makes grittier action movies. Before Suicide Squad, that's who he was. Now he's the shitty director of Suicide Squad, but before that, David Ayers did that. He also wrote Training Day. He was a different director before Suicide Squad. And this seems like something that would be perfect for him. Perfect to come back. He can use Will Smith, who needs a gritty action movie again, needs to have a hit that people actually sort of remember and like, and Max Landis is involved for some reason, and you'd think this could work out, and it really doesn't. And it's so bland in so many ways that its special high conceptness, like the idea that you're seeing in the trailers, is really the only thing that's special about it, and it's kind of overall Hollywood bland, ordinary blandness washes over it in such a way that it doesn't feel special. It's like so remarkable how almost everyone involved in this seemed to kill anything special about it. And I don't think this is one of the worst films of the year, but it's honestly one of the least memorable. In fact, after watching this, I felt sort of sleepy, and because this movie felt like 4 hours long, and I thought maybe I'll just film this another day. But I also thought, I don't know if I'll remember a lot of this, because it just felt like so cliched and hackneyed, and that shouldn't be happening with a movie like this. Taking a fantasy element and this gritty cop thing, this should be original and different. But halfway through I realized, it's having all these problems, because basically the concept is they live in this fantasy world where there was like sort of a big Lord of the Rings event, and instead of everyone sort of just disappearing, they all stuck around, and this is an alternative universe with an alternative history where orcs and elves and all this stuff existed this whole time. They have to find a wand, which apparently there aren't a lot of them or something, and what that could do if it gets out. And so they're kind of trying to save this wand and this woman who isn't really as important for most of the movie for no reason. And the whole idea of like a cop drama type thing with the Lord of the Rings thing could potentially be a good idea. And I actually think someone could probably remake this into something interesting. This is not that movie. But halfway through I went, oh wait, this is a shitty version of Zootopia. This is the shitty live action gritty movie version of Zootopia, where Zootopia took 48 hours basically. The Eddie Murphy, Nick Nolte movie directed by Walter Hill, which is really good, you should see it, and took that and made up this made up world and explained its premise and went off of that and made this whole movie and did it fairly quickly. Bright doesn't fully explain the world it's living in, tries to use the orcs and the elves as both the 1%, being the elves and the orcs being kind of what I guess would be a minority or something like that, exists within the human world where all of the human societal constructs and basically our world now still exists. So it's almost like everything's the same, but there's just all these other people there, and it feels like both that the world has changed but nothing has changed at all, and it just never really has as much fun with the concept or plays with the concept or does anything interesting with the concept. It just kind of makes you wonder like why they went high concept but also wouldn't fully commit to it and explain it in a perfect way that Zootopia did. It honestly felt like Max Landis had not seen one of the biggest movies of recent memory and wrote this movie out of some sort of ridiculous ignorance to not really fully understand how to explain a whole world and a whole universe. I mean, part of me was curious about this world and everything that was going on within it at the beginning of this film, but so many of the bland lines in this and like the uninteresting kind of storytelling and the whole idea that they're taking around this girl with them who looks sort of like Margot Robbie in a way, but they don't do anything with for a majority of the film. I was like, does she have anything to do with this movie? like other than just holding the wand. Like she doesn't say anything until like maybe the beginning of the third act. She starts talking. Really, she talks a little to the orc guy. Oh, and that's the whole thing, because him and the orc, he's the first orc police officer, so you know, Zootopia. That doesn't really work. I don't think Joel Edgerton was a good choice for this. It doesn't seem like Joel Edgerton, so it's sort of like Oscar Isaacs in X-Men Apocalypse. It feels like unreal that he was in that. Like it just doesn't make sense, because he usually works a lot better. He doesn't feel like Joel Edgerton, so he did a good job in that regard, but it didn't feel like they were doing much of anything with that character. Like, why have it in there? It just like, there's so many ideas in this that could have been so many different movies, and they kind of collide together to be nothing. It's like you had all this promise and you just end up with like a bland, kind of boring cop movie blockbuster. Will Smith made Men in Black, and I think everyone's always chasing that kind of sci-fi fantasy kind of fun movie that is what Ghostbusters basically was, but Men in Black is sort of the other success franchise in that. This feels like one of those kind of bland R.I.P.D. kind of rip-off movies that you sort of forget about, but seems to have a lot of promise going in, and people go, hey, nobody thought Ghostbusters would be a hit, but you're like, yeah, but nobody thought Green Lantern would be a hit either. Bright also falls under the thing that Okja did as well, where Okja I think is a much better movie than this, but it feels like a movie that no studio would have approved other than Netflix. It feels like you're watching something from the reject pile that nobody else wanted, and I think that's a big problem with Netflix making these bigger movies, is because often I've noticed the public will check them out, but often afterwards they're like, yeah, but I don't really take this studio very seriously as a movie studio. It's like what they make as TV seems to be something people do take seriously, and it seems like Netflix feels the same way, as this was not rated R on the service. It was actually rated TVMA, which I think is a little telling. That seems to be what they are better at, and I think this just doesn't feel like they're really ready to make big movies. Max Landis actually wrote this for David Ayers, and I don't disagree that, like, looking at the script, it feels like a David Ayers type of thing, but I sort of wish David Ayers had maybe taken a pass at this script or something. I don't know what happened to David Ayers. This is shot and directed a lot like Suicide Squad, and it feels like that movie sort of just ruined any promise that David Ayers had. I never thought End of Watch or Fury were like the best movies of their respected years, or movies I've watched more than once, but they had a promise and a nugget of something that you feel like this guy could be a guy who could do bigger movies, because he was so good at doing kind of smaller budget films. And between this and Suicide Squad, like, please go back to making mid-budget films. Like, End of Watch is something that seemed like it could never work, and it really did, and I would love to see an End of Watch from him at Netflix again. I would love to see that kind of a cop drama. Like, do a simple kind of cop drama. This doesn't have any of that. He can't shoot action sequences at all. They're incomprehensible. The kind of neon light kind of vision of LA and like how gritty it is, and there's like way too much graffiti which has no real purpose. Like, and I like graffiti, and it just feels like a bunch of throw up all over the place. It doesn't feel like he's saying much of anything other than he thinks Michael Mann is cool. So, but what often I've noticed when people are influenced by Michael Mann is they're not saying anything with it other than that they like Michael Mann. It feels like something that in the end had little to no stakes to it. He takes these kind of more simplistic ideas, and it's like he's not ready to do a high concept thing. This needed to be done by a high concept director. It's kind of the fault that a lot of people do when they do these high concept things, is they think of, well, who can do this normally, and it'll be a really creative director choice. And I think in terms of Bright, it was not. The direction killed it. It wasn't written in a way to really explore and get you into this world. I think sometimes too much world building can kill a movie, and this definitely does. You should have gotten me in more at the beginning of the movie, but it just like kept giving me little tidbits and little tidbits. Give me something at the beginning, and it just like, is this going to be about Will Smith and his partner, or is it going to be about this world? It never really seemed to make up its mind about that. It can be about both, much like what Zootopia did, but Zootopia understood what it was doing. This just feels like big Hollywood being like, oh no, you want gritty, you want dark, that means it's good. In terms of storytelling, I think it's funny that the bunny police detective movie did much better than the gritty Will Smith movie that acts like it's about socioeconomical things, but Bunny Detective totally beat it to the punch and got to say a lot more. This doesn't really say much of anything other than, you know, these guys are good cops and other cops are bad and society's this way, and, you know, they sort of get away with it in the end or something. I mean, it's just so nothing. And I think that's the biggest thing with Bright, is you watch it on streaming because you're already paying for Netflix and you're already watching other stuff, so you're like, why not? And I think a lot of people watch this like and drunkenly fall asleep over the holidays, and I think it's probably only good for that. David Ayers I'm sort of done with. I'm not as big into Max Landis, but I don't hate him necessarily. I think he kind of shows some little bits of promise, but not necessarily enough promise to be as hyped as certainly he is. And his storytelling in this shows someone who likes ideas but doesn't necessarily know how to flesh them out and make them into interesting stories. He feels like an idea guy, but as a storyteller he just feels like any other Hollywood screenwriter. I wouldn't really recommend Bright, and I think in terms of Netflix, there are other Netflix movies I would like to watch and review and things, and I need to do that. And I think Bright was certainly a big waste of my time, and it felt like a big Hollywood blockbuster that they would put out around the Christmas season and just hope, you know, The Last Jedi was sold out and that, you know, I was already there, so I'll just buy a ticket to this because Will Smith is cool. And I think that's kind of why people are watching this, but it doesn't feel like there's kind of a desire to or a want to, other than like, this I've heard is really awful, so maybe I'll see it for that reason. And it doesn't even live up to that. It's just like an awful movie in its blandness and everything. I think the Emoji Movie probably will go down as the worst movie of this year because it is really bad and it represents a horrible future. This probably represents the horrible future of Netflix and just making kind of big nothingness Hollywood blockbusters that Hollywood already makes, but realizing they can kind of get away with it because the negative, you know, box office that this probably would have had isn't there, so there's this safety net to sort of take care of it. And that is a bit of a scary future. I'm gonna hope Bright 2 doesn't happen. I don't think this necessarily is good for the future of movies. This nothing can go on to act like it should be something more than it is, which isn't anything. I think Bright is kind of an oxymoron of a title, because as a movie I think this is probably something that had a lot of promise, could have been something with everyone involved, should have been something with everyone involved, but never really understood what exactly they were fully doing with it. Will Smith never gets around this thing, which is unfortunate because I love Will Smith and I would like him to make a big movie comeback, but I don't think Bright ever really gets what it has, and it has a lot of potential in terms of when you really go into everyone involved in this, other than Nomi Replace looking really cool. It has nothing about it that is interesting at all. It feels like a failure, like, you know, a Repo or something like that, where you have a huge world that you could do a lot with, but you never really get around it because you don't have someone who's focused on telling a story. And I think there are probably way more problems with that. You don't have a lead actor who really shows a kind of compelling, distinct character. You don't have action sequences that really work. You don't have much that really works about this. You just have a bland nothingness movie that isn't directed well. Don't think this would be a film that anyone's going to think about after the holidays are over. We'll probably still be debating The Last Jedi, and that's not because blockbusters have taken over and we can't shut up about Star Wars, which that might be a little true. It's because this movie will not leave an impact with you whatsoever, because it doesn't even leave an impact on itself. It kind of just happens and goes away, and then you will go away and totally forget about it. And Netflix spent $90 million to make all of that happen, and that's the future that we live in. So I guess we'll probably sort of be fine with that all happening and let Bright kind of coexist in the nothingness of its algorithm and be totally forgotten in the mist that is the Netflix search algorithm. So if you've seen Bright and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.